Hello and welcome to the Kitchen Table Theology podcast, where each week, Pastor Jeff Cranston explores biblical theology that provides practical life applications in an understandable way. Thanks for joining us at the table. Let's get started.
Hello and welcome to Kitchen Table Theology. I'm your host, Tiffany Coker. Along with my dad, Pastor Jeff Cranston, we're seeking not only to help you know deep, solid biblical theology, but to know the Word of God and the promises of God that are given to us in His Word, all while holding to solid theological truths in your heart, soul, and mind. Can you believe today's podcast? We are here. We are completing the 66th book of the Bible in our Bible overview series. This is the last one. We really do hope that this series of the podcast has been beneficial to you and that you have learned something throughout this journey with us.
I feel like we should be really tired after 66 of these.
You did all the work. You deserve it. You pray.
But we are going to take a break.
Yes.
And so this is going to be the last podcast for 2024. So you might be listening to this in the future and you don't have a reference of date. And so for you, the very next podcast will be the very next podcast. But for us, it's going to be about a 6-week break. So Lord willing, we'll come back and resume Kitchen Table Theology after the first of the year in 2025.
Perfect. That sounds like a plan. Dad, we're going to end today with this last book of the Old Testament, which is Malachi. And like all of our podcast episodes before this one, we hope that it will just, all of these episodes serve as a reference for you. So if you need to turn back to them when you have a question about a book or you're studying something, looking at a theological topic, you can just go back to that podcast and search that and find that. That was our goal here with this Bible overview series. So that will be the same thing today for Malachi. Dad, last episode for this series. How are we going to begin this podcast today?
With something fun. You know, a lot of the podcasts can be a little bit deep. That's just because of the themes we're dealing with and the books of the Bible we're dealing with. And they can be a little bit heavy for sure, but I thought it'd be fun to end with something a little lighthearted, some not too serious Bible Q&A. So these are just horrible dad Bible jokes. So Tiff, are you ready for these? Let's see how
ready.
It goes.
Let's do this.
Okay. So Kitchen Table Theologian, you answer too if you think you know what these are. And I'm telling you right now, they're terrible. But you might laugh. How does Moses make his coffee in the morning?
Tell us.
He brews it. Hebrews, right? Okay.
So that's how this is going to go, huh?
This is that. I told you, don't expect much out of this. And our kitchen table community would expect nothing less. So here's another one. When is medicine first mentioned in the Bible? When's medicine first mentioned in the Bible?
I don't know.
No idea?
I have no idea. Medicine?
It was when God gave Moses 2 tablets.
That's a good one.
Who's the greatest babysitter mentioned in the Bible? Now, that was David, because he rocked Goliath to a very deep sleep. That was a bit of a stretch.
I wouldn't have come up with that one. I'm glad I did.
You gotta think on that a little bit. How do we know Peter was a rich fisherman? He was a rich fisherman. Well, that was by his net income. Who was the greatest comedian in the Bible? And that was Samson, because he brought the house down.
Okay, we got to wrap this up. One more. As great as your dad jokes are here, one more.
Okay, 2 more. What is the first automobile mentioned in the Bible?
Oh, I've heard you say this one.
Yeah. What is it?
A Honda.
It's a Honda because the book of Acts tells us the apostles were all in one accord.
We used to have a Honda Accord. I think you told that joke a lot then.
We had I think we had a couple of those things through the years. Okay, last joke. Which of the prophets was Italian? Well, that was Malachi, known to us as Malachi. So I have been waiting for 65 books of the Bible to do that joke right there. Yeah, Malachi was the Italian prophet.
Malachi. Okay. Well, thank goodness that's our last joke. Glad you waited so long to share that one with us. That brings us
calling
to...
those are jokes or the stretch.
That brings us to the book we're going to look at today, which is actually Malachi. So, Dad, how about sharing the basics with us?
Well, yes, of course. So we'll get serious now. So, like many of the Old Testament books, Malachi received its name from the author. You know, that's happened in a lot of the Bible books. The very first verse reads, the message of the word of the Lord given to Israel through Malachi. I almost said Malachi. Through Malachi. So his name, the name Malachi, literally means messenger, which points to his role as a prophet of the Lord, delivering God's message to God's people. And let's see, Malachi offered no other identifying information about himself, and he was leaving out markers typical of other prophets, such as his father's name or who the current leader of Israel was, so we could we could kind of fill in the spaces there. We don't get that with Malachi. So there isn't a lot of historical context for us to draw in. There is some. There's just not as much as some of the other prophetic books. However, based on the content of the book, it becomes clear that Malachi delivered his message, and it was a message of judgment, to a Judean audience. So Jews living in the region of Judea, they were very familiar with worshiping at the temple. So that comes through. So with that helps us to date things a little bit. We know the temple's been rebuilt. We know that they have started worshiping at the temple again. And verse 11 of chapter 2 gives us a little insight into this. So, Tiff, how about reading that one for us?
Sure. Malachi 2:11. Judah has dealt treacherously, and an abomination has been committed in Israel and in Jerusalem, for Judah has profaned the sanctuary of the Lord, which he loves, and has married the daughter of a foreign god.
So we've jumped ahead a few hundred years from Zechariah and Hosea and Amos and those guys. So the temple's been rebuilt, worship has been reinstituted, and they've already turned away from the true worship of the Lord, leaving themselves under judgment and in need of salvation. And that's what his message is directed at.
So you said there's not a lot of historical pointers really for us to look at to get an idea of when this was written. But I think we still do have some idea of when Malachi wrote this. Is that correct?
Yeah, we do. And we know that he obviously wrote to the Jews of Judah. But verse 8 of chapter 1 gives us some insight to the historical setting.
Verse 8. What specifically does verse 8 tell us?
Well, it's kind of a small thing, but tells us a lot. Malachi used the Persian word for governor, indicating a time period between 538 and 333 BC. So you can tell we've jumped ahead a lot on the calendar. So this was when the Persian Empire ruled the Promised Land. So, he's writing in Hebrew, but he uses the Persian word for governor. So that's a big clue to us. Malachi also wrote about the corruption of the temple sacrifices, meaning that he likely delivered his message many years after the Israelites rebuilt the temple. So we know they did that in 515 BC. So this puts him most likely in the 400s. So his concerns mirror those of Nehemiah's. So that suggests that Malachi prophesied to the people while Nehemiah had left the city for several years, and we know he did that around 432. So that's about when all this was going on.
So when we put all of that together in the historical context, this last Old Testament book comes about 400 years prior to the advent of the Messiah, to Jesus Christ coming.
Yeah, that's about it, which makes it a uniquely important prophetic book because it contains God's last words to his people, or any people anywhere, for a little over 400 years. There's been prophet after prophet after prophet. God has been talking to his people, communicating to his people through the prophets, and now Malachi comes, Malachi goes, and then there is silence from heaven for about 400 years.
This book is only 4 chapters long, so it's pretty short. Dad, what's the key idea throughout Malachi?
Well, real quick, the people of Judah began to be exiled from the promised land back in 605 BC, returning from Babylon 70 years later. We've well established over these various podcasts, 70-year Babylonian captivity. By the time Malachi arrives, they had been back in the land for more than 100 years and were looking for the blessings they expected to receive when they returned. You know, hey, we're coming back. Surely God's just going to bless the heck out of us. Well, the temple had been rebuilt, and the fervor of those early returning Israelites gave way to a thorough apathy for the things of God. As each generation came, they got further away from the passion of following God. So this led to a rampant corruption among the priest and the priesthood, and just a spiritual lethargy among the people. So Malachi came along at a time when the people were struggling to believe that God even loved them.
Which I think is hard to imagine after he has just rescued them from Babylonian captivity, had them return, rebuild Jerusalem, the temple, all of that. But I guess that really shows us a lot about the human heart, and also maybe helps me think about that we really are not all that different from those Israelites. It's easy for us to forget those things too.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. They certainly doubted God's love for them. In only the second verse in the book, we read, "I have loved you, says the Lord, but you say, how have you loved us?" So that's them talking to God. How have you loved us? That tells you a lot. The people focused on their rather unfortunate circumstances, and they refused to account for their own sinfulness. So God pointed the finger back at them, and through Malachi, God told the people where they had fallen short in their covenant with him. And if they hoped to see changes, they needed to take responsibility for their own actions and serve God faithfully according to the covenant, the promises their fathers had made to God on Mount Sinai, going back so far ago, all those years before. And so, that's what God was talking to them about.
As we start to wrap it up today, let's talk about a couple of theological themes that we find in the book of Malachi. Dad, what theme rises to the top here that we should take note of today?
I really enjoy the English Standard Version Study Bible, the ESV Study Bible. So I was looking at what they were saying about this book, and they offer 2 theological, all-encompassing thoughts on Malachi. And I thought they were very good. So Kitchen Table, let me share them with you. The first one is, they're saying these are basically the 2 themes of the book. The first is this: the pervasive tendency towards spiritually empty religion. That could be in 2024, or it could be in 432 BC. The pervasive tendency towards spiritually empty worship. And the second one is the worldwide exaltation of God's name. The key indictment against Israel is this hollow, formal, corner-cutting religion. Their sacrifices to God are manipulated rather than, when they went to sacrifice, you're supposed to give your best animals. They were retaining their best animals and sending like their second best and so forth to be sacrificed. So they were holding the best for themselves and giving God the second best. So their sacrifices to God they're manipulating them to help them keep their best animals. You say, well, what kind of a big deal is that? It's a really big deal, because it tells you their heart wasn't really, I'm not willing to do anything and everything for the Lord. The spiritual leaders also only pretended, chapter 2, only pretended to honor the Lord. They're playing a game. Marriage was taken very lightly. That's in latter part of chapter 2. Tithes and offerings are withheld because they love money so much. That's chapter 3. So this pervasive tendency towards spiritually empty religion. And then the other theme, and we'll start to wrap it up here, was this worldwide exaltation of God's name. Verse 11 of chapter 1 says, "For from the rising of the sun to its setting, my name will be great among the nations, and in every place incense will be offered to my name, and a pure offering, for my name will be great among the nations." It's a huge theme through this book.
As we start to draw an application from all of this for our own lives and for the church today, I think there's some good reminders. We have to stay vigilant against having just a dead or rote religion take the place of our living relationship with Jesus Christ. Those are two very different things. We can say the right words, have the right answers, but neglect things that come out of having a living relationship with Jesus, like loving our neighbors, taking care of those less fortunate than us, and so many other things that come naturally as you're being led by the Spirit and growing in your walk with Jesus. Then those things come out of that relationship.
Yep, very well said, Tiff. God actually addresses exactly what you've been talking about in Malachi. He says that when love for one's neighbor is neglected, it invites God's judgment. That's pretty serious. And I would say in summaries, we look back over all of the Old Testament, and we've done the old and new here. We note God's people failing again and again and again in many ways. And each time, God called his people back to himself, and each time, Israel would return and then fail again, and prompting that cycle to begin over again. God's final word of the Old Testament is here in Malachi, and it concerns judgment for sin and testifies to our inability to love him without the help of his grace. And so, Kitchen Table Theologian, as we draw this to a close today, I would ask us this: do you struggle to follow God consistently? Malachi's call prompts us to live faithfully before God and offers hope that God is not yet through with extending mercy to his people. And that's an incredibly wonderful thing. And of course, the ultimate proof of that comes roughly 400 years later, when God speaks again and the silence is broken and a babe is born in Bethlehem.
Well, there you have it, Kitchen Table Theologians. We just finished all 66 books of our Bible overview series. So, Dad, thank you for leading us through that. If you are enjoying the podcast, would you consider leaving a rating or a review? We do deeply appreciate your help in getting the word out. You can check out today's episode notes and more at jeffcranston.com. You can also email us at pastorjeff@lowcountrycc.org. As always, thanks are due to our friends at Low Country Community Church here in Bluffton, South Carolina, and at Streamline Podcasts for making this podcast possible.
And I just want to say thanks, add my thanks to what Tiff just said. Thanks for hanging in there with us. We have done something good here. We have walked through 66 books of the Bible, all of them. And I hope it's been beneficial to you and you've gotten a better idea. And I just want to reiterate what Tiff said at the top there. This is a good resource. It's one of the reasons we're doing this is so that people will have a resource. So if you're studying a book and you want to get an overview, you've got a podcast that you can go back to and grab. Please continue to tell your friends about Kitchen Table Theology. And we are just continually amazed at the breadth of the podcast. We will soon, I think before the end of the year, we'll have 100,000 downloads on our little old podcast here, which we are really, really grateful to God for. So with all of that said, we're going to take a break. You take a break, and Lord willing, we'll meet you back here soon at the table. God bless you.
You've been listening to the Kitchen Table Theology podcast with Pastor Jeff Cranston. Join us next time for more insights into biblical truth. If you'd like to know more on today's topic, please check out our show notes. If you have a question from today's podcast, kindly email us at pastorjeff@lowcountrycc.org. If you're enjoying this podcast, would you consider leaving a rating and review? We deeply appreciate your help in getting the word out. And be sure to subscribe on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, or in your favorite podcasting app to continue this journey with us as we learn about and apply God's Word to our lives. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time here at Kitchen Table Theology.